This story is titled, Threw Out My Cheating Wife. Then her lover appeared at my door. Here's what happened. Hey everyone, I'm a 38-year-old marketing executive at a major company. I make good money and have built a comfortable life for myself over the years. What I'm about to share is the story of how my marriage fell apart. I'm not looking for advice. That ship has sailed. I just need to get this off my chest and share what happened. 8 years ago, I met my wife Claire. She was 32 when everything went down. I first saw her at this fancy men's clothing store in the city. I won't name the place because they don't deserve to be associated with this mess, but it's one of those high-end establishments where they remember your name if you're a regular customer. I started going there regularly for work suits, as I needed to look sharp for business meetings. I actually enjoyed the atmosphere of the place too. Professional, but warm. Claire worked there as a sales associate, and from the moment I met her, I could tell she was something else. She had this energy about her that could light up any room just by walking in. She knew how to make everyone feel special, and it wasn't just because she was good at sales. Her charm was infectious. What impressed me most was how she remembered every little detail, like what tie I wore during my last visit, or the cufflinks I had purchased for important meetings. She made the shopping experience feel personal, like she actually cared about her customers beyond just making a sale. I started visiting the store more often, and if I'm being honest, it wasn't because I needed more clothes. I had plenty of suits already. I just wanted to see her. I would buy small things, pocket squares, new socks, anything to have an excuse to chat with her. Our conversations always ended up lasting much longer than planned. Finally, after several months of this, I got the courage to ask her out. When she said yes, I was over the moon. Everything just clicked between us after that first date. As we got to know each other better, Claire told me about her background. She came from modest means but had always dreamed bigger. She wanted to travel, have a beautiful home, and live that picture-perfect lifestyle you see in magazines. I admired her ambition back then. She wasn't shy about what she wanted in life, and I liked that she was upfront about it. We dated for about a year before getting married. During that time, I was climbing the corporate ladder at my company, while Claire continued working at the clothing store. She was really good at her job. She loved meeting interesting people, stayed on top of all the latest fashion trends, and occasionally got free merchandise as a perk. As things got more serious between us, she started talking about quitting her job. She said she didn't see herself as just a sales girl forever and wanted something more out of life. I was completely supportive of this idea. I was making enough money to support both of us easily, and I wanted her to chase her dreams, whatever they might be. We had a fancy wedding ceremony in Miami, and Claire quit her job right after we returned from our honeymoon. She said she was ready for bigger things in life and referred to her retail work as beneath her now. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just happy to provide for her and thought I was being a good husband by making sure she didn't have to worry about money or deal with demanding work. Looking back, I realized that's when things started changing between us. Though the first changes were so subtle, I barely noticed them. Looking back, I realized that's when things started changing between us. The first changes were subtle, almost imperceptible at the time. Claire wanted to upgrade her wardrobe, saying it needed to match her new life as my wife. That seemed reasonable at first. After all, she had worked in fashion and knew the importance of appearance. But her taste quickly evolved from simply nice to exclusively expensive. She wasn't interested in regular high-quality clothes anymore. She only wanted top designer brands. Versace, Fendi, Hermes, you name it, she had to have it. What started as occasional purchases turned into monthly shopping sprees where price tags didn't seem to matter to her anymore. I thought it was just a phase, maybe her way of celebrating her new life with me. But it wasn't temporary. This shopping habit became her whole identity. She started posting everything online. Pictures of expensive outfits, designer handbags, fancy restaurant dinners, all perfectly staged like a magazine spread. She was clearly trying to project an elite image, even though we weren't quite at that level financially. Sure, we were comfortable, but we weren't swimming in money. Claire also got really into attending charity events and joining social clubs. I thought this was a positive development at first. She talked about it being a way to give back to the community and build connections. But I soon noticed something different about her approach. She seemed to care more about being seen at these events than actually contributing to the causes. She would spend hours getting ready, making sure her outfit was Instagram-worthy, then just network all night with people she barely knew. It felt like she was chasing validation rather than making genuine connections. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. Claire started looking down on her former coworkers from the clothing store. She used to talk about how much she loved her job there and how close she was to everyone. But after quitting, she acted like they were beneath her. She would say things like, "Can you believe they still work there?" Or, "I could never go back to that life." The way she dismissed people who were once her friends disturbed me. She started criticizing me too. It was subtle at first. Small comments that didn't seem overtly rude but still stung. Despite the fact that I was always the one who cared about style, I was shopping at that store before I even met her, she would say things like, "You should really get a better watch." Or, "Don't you think it's time to upgrade your car?" She wasn't directly insulting me, but she was constantly comparing me to her new rich friends, and I always seemed to fall short in her eyes. Another red flag was the increasing secrecy. Earlier in our relationship, she used to tell me everything, all her plans, her daily schedule, the people she met. Now her explanations became vague mentions like meeting a friend for lunch with no details. When I asked who she was meeting, she'd either change the subject or brush off my question completely. I didn't think much about it at the time, but those moments planted seeds of doubt in my mind. Looking back now, all the dots connect. Claire had always been ambitious, but something fundamental had changed. Her healthy ambition had transformed into entitled expectation. She wasn't the woman I fell in love with anymore. She became more focused on status and appearances than on our life together. I was already losing her. I just didn't realize how bad things would eventually get. Here's where the story gets interesting. Claire was always better with technology than I was. She had one of those Amazon Alexa devices in our home that she used for everything. I barely touched it, except occasionally for setting timers or playing music while working. She, however, treated it like her personal assistant, using it for grocery lists, reminders, and planning her events. I never thought much about that little device, but ironically, it would be the thing that exposed everything. It was a Friday evening when everything changed. Claire told me she had a late charity meeting, which wasn't unusual. She was involved with several organizations at this point and was always talking about how important her work was. She left around 8 p.m., wearing some expensive dress with her hair and makeup done perfectly, like she was going to a gala rather than a meeting. I didn't question it, figuring she just wanted to impress the people she'd be seeing. I was on the couch scrolling through my phone when Alexa suddenly chimed with a reminder notification. Meeting with Nathan at 9 p.m. at the Palm. I froze. The Palm was a high-end steakhouse I'd been to for business dinners. Definitely not the kind of place where charity meetings would be held. And who was Nathan? In all her talk about social circles and charity work, I had never heard that name before. I sat there staring at the Alexa device, my mind racing with possibilities. Could it be a mistake? Maybe it was work-related somehow? But if so, why the secrecy? Why hadn't she ever mentioned someone named Nathan? Then I remembered something. I knew the manager at the Palm. Let's call him Tommy. He'd helped me before with last-minute reservations for important clients, and I still had his number. Without thinking twice, I called him. "Hey, Tommy, weird favor to ask," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "My wife might be at the Palm tonight. I just need to know if she's actually there." Tommy hesitated on the other end of the line. "Everything okay?" he asked, clearly sensing something was off. "Not really," I admitted. "If you see her, could you let me know? Maybe take a picture if you can? I just need to know what's happening." There was another pause before Tommy replied, "All right, I'll keep an eye out. What's she wearing?" I described her dress, and Tommy said he'd call if he spotted her. After hanging up, I started pacing around our living room, which suddenly felt too small. I didn't know what to think. Part of me hoped it was nothing, but deep down, I think I already knew. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed. It was Tommy. "She's here," he said, confirming my fears. "She's with some guy, younger guy." My stomach dropped to my feet. Tommy sent a picture, and there was Claire, sitting across from this guy who couldn't be older than his late 20s. He had that typical douchebag look, rolled up sleeves, flashy watch, and a smug grin like he owned the place. Claire was laughing and leaning in close to him, looking happier than I'd seen her in years. "Want me to keep taking pictures?" Tommy asked. "Yeah, get whatever you can," I replied, my voice hollow. For the next 20 minutes, Tommy sent more photos and even a short video showing them leaving together, walking close with their hands brushing against each other. Claire was smiling like everything in her world was perfect. I felt sick to my stomach. The next day, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. I kept seeing Claire with that guy every time I closed my eyes. All the signs I'd been ignoring suddenly made sense. The secretive behavior, the constant criticisms, how distracted she'd been. Everything clicked into place. I knew I needed more than just a few photos from Tommy. I had to play it cool for now. Claire came home that night acting like nothing had happened. She told me all about the charity meeting, even making up fake details to fill the story. I nodded along, pretending to listen, while inside I was boiling with anger and betrayal. Things really started coming together after that night. I was past hoping it was all a misunderstanding. Between Tommy's photos from the Palm and all the breadcrumbs Claire had left behind, I knew something was definitely going on. But I wanted undeniable proof, ironclad evidence, before making any moves. That's when I hired a private investigator. I'd never done anything like that before, but I figured he was the professional, and I should just let him do his thing. I gave him everything I knew, Claire's schedule, places she liked to go, and all the information I had about this Nathan guy. The PI started finding dirt almost immediately. Within a week, he had compiled a file that made my blood boil. It was packed with photos, detailed reports, and receipts of everything, showing that this wasn't just a one-time thing. Claire and Nathan were having a full-blown affair that had been going on for months. First, there were dozens of photos showing Claire and Nathan meeting up at fancy restaurants, walking hand in hand, and sitting in parks laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. The PI had captured pictures of them leaving hotels together, looking way too comfortable with each other. There was nothing innocent about any of it. Then came all the receipts. What shocked me even more than the affair itself was that Claire had been paying for everything. Every dinner, every hotel stay, and she'd even bought him gifts. The PI tracked down a purchase at some high-end men's store where she had bought Nathan a designer watch that cost more than my first car. And she was doing all of this with my money. Every swipe of her card, every dollar spent, came from accounts that I had built through years of hard work. The PI dug even deeper and found Nathan's social media profiles. This guy was a total piece of work. A wannabe influencer who thought he was hot stuff with his few thousand followers. His posts were full of shirtless selfies, cringe-worthy motivational quotes, and pictures from clubs. He didn't even have a real job but was living it up on my dime. I couldn't believe the audacity. Here I was working my ass off providing a comfortable life for Claire, and she was using it to bankroll this loser. The whole thing was unbelievable. Based on his posts, Nathan was at least 10 years younger than Claire. He was the type who thought he'd become famous without doing anything to earn it. He worked as a bartender at some trendy cocktail place downtown, the same place where Claire had started networking. The more I learned about him, the more ridiculous the situation seemed. Claire, who only ate at fancy restaurants and only wore designer clothes, was running around with this guy who lived in a studio apartment, made TikToks about hustle culture, and probably couldn't even afford Olive Garden on his own. It wasn't just insulting, it was pathetic. By now, I had all the proof I needed. The PI's file was solid, and there was no way Claire could talk her way out of this. But I didn't want a private confrontation. That would be too easy. Claire lived for her image. She loved being seen as the perfect wife, the elegant charity woman who had it all together. If she wanted to play that game, then I decided that everyone would see the truth. I started planning my next move. It wasn't just about catching her. I had to make sure she couldn't easily escape the consequences. For the next week, I played the role of the dumb, oblivious husband and pretended everything was normal. Claire kept up her usual routine, still acting like nothing was wrong. She continued leaving for charity events and coming back late, always with elaborate stories about people she met and connections she made. I nodded along, pretending to believe her, while inside I was seething with rage. I knew she was still seeing Nathan. The PI kept tracking them and reported that they met up at least twice that week. Once for dinner and once for drinks at his bar. The PI even got a photo of Claire kissing him in the parking lot while sitting in his beat-up Honda. I wasn't even shocked anymore. It was just more proof of what I already knew. One night, Claire came home and casually mentioned she was going shopping for a new dress for an upcoming charity gala. She was being all smug about it, talking about making impressions and how her social circle had certain standards. It took everything in me not to laugh in her face. Here she was acting superior while I had a folder of evidence ready to destroy her carefully constructed world. I decided not to wait any longer. The proof was piling up, and it was time to make my move. I couldn't just confront her privately. Claire had spent years building her image, presenting herself as the perfect wife, a high society queen that everyone envied. I decided that her downfall needed an audience. She wanted the spotlight? I'd give her one she'd never forget. I started planning a party for the week after the PI gave me his final report. I invited everyone who mattered to Claire, her old co-workers from the clothing store, the ones she looked down on, members of her charity board, and women from her social circles who worshipped her. These were the people who thought Claire was untouchable, the ones she loved impressing. I also invited some of my friends as backup in case things got heated. I told everyone it was a celebration of Claire's amazing charity work and our marriage. It was easy to convince them to come. Her social circle loved any excuse to dress up, drink expensive wine on someone else's tab, and be seen at an event. Meanwhile, I was working with my lawyer to get the divorce papers ready. I wanted everything finalized before the party happened. There would be no room for manipulation, no escape routes for Claire. When the night of the party arrived, Claire was in her element. She had spent hours getting ready, parading around the house in her expensive flowing dress and designer heels, making sure everything was perfect. She asked if I was excited about the party, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from giving everything away. "Oh, I'm definitely excited," was all I said. Guests started arriving, and Claire was absolutely glowing. She went into perfect hostess mode, greeting everyone at the door with that signature charming smile of hers, making sure drinks were flowing, and chatting with all her admirers, the women who idolized her lifestyle. Watching her soak it all in was almost entertaining, knowing what was about to happen. Once everyone had settled in with drinks in hand, it was time for my toast. Claire looked over at me, smiling expectantly, thinking I was about to praise her in front of everyone. "Thank you all for coming," I began as the room quieted down. "Tonight's a special night. I want to celebrate the truth because sometimes truth has a funny way of coming out." The room went silent. Claire's smile started to falter as she gave me a confused look, trying to figure out what I meant. But it was too late for her now. The PI's folder was my trump card, and I was ready to use it. I pulled out the folder and a small projector remote. With the click of a button, an image appeared on the wall. A photo of Claire and Nathan holding hands at the palm. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. "This," I said, pointing to the photo, "is Claire, my loving wife, with Nathan, a bartender. They've been seeing each other for months." I clicked the remote again, and a video started playing. Footage of them leaving a hotel together, looking relaxed and laughing like they owned the world. I kept going through the evidence, showing all the receipts for dinners, hotel stays, and gifts she had bought him, all with my money. I even showed screenshots from Alexa with their meeting reminders. Claire was frozen in place, her face as white as a sheet. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "Are you kidding me?" One of her charity friends spoke up, turning to Claire in disbelief. "Is this for real?" Claire tried defending herself, saying, "It's not what it looks like." But I cut her off immediately. "Save it! The evidence speaks for itself." Her old co-workers were whispering among themselves, clearly enjoying the show. I even heard one say, "Karma's a bitch." Claire looked around desperately, searching for allies, but nobody came to her defense. Even her closest friends were too stunned to say anything. I dropped the final bomb. "I've already filed for divorce. There's nothing left to say." Claire stormed out, completely humiliated. I didn't try to stop her. The damage was already done. Surprisingly, the party didn't end after her dramatic exit. Most guests stayed, finishing their drinks and gossiping about what had just happened. The charity friends were especially vocal, saying things like, "I can't believe she'd do this, and I always thought she was fake." Her old co-workers from the clothing store were having the time of their lives. One even came up to me and said, "You handled that better than I would have." She always thought she was better than us. By the end of the night, I was feeling relieved. After months of carrying this weight, trying to figure out what was happening in my marriage, everything was now out in the open. Claire's carefully constructed facade had been shattered, and there was no going back now. After the party chaos subsided, the next step was clear. Get Claire out of my life for good. The divorce process went smoother than expected, thanks to one key decision I had made years ago, the prenup. When we got engaged, I had insisted on having a prenuptial agreement. It was a tough conversation at the time. Claire pushed back hard, saying things like, "Don't you trust me?" And, "If we're getting married, why do we need something so transactional?" But I stood my ground. I explained that it wasn't about trust. It was about protecting both of us if things ever went wrong. I had worked hard for my money, and wasn't going to risk it. She finally signed it, probably thinking it wouldn't matter because she was convinced we'd be together forever. Or maybe she thought it was just a formality that I'd forget about when the time came. Fast forward to now, and it turned out to be the smartest decision I ever made. The morning after the party, I started throwing her things in bags. I didn't wait for her to come back. I didn't want to hear her pleading or excuses. I met with my lawyer, who had already laid the groundwork for the divorce before the confrontation. All we had to do was put things in motion. My lawyer filed the papers, including all evidence of her infidelity, the photos, receipts, and the PI's entire report. Everything was meticulously documented. Claire got served a few days later. I didn't warn her it was coming, so I can only imagine her shock when she opened that envelope. Surprisingly, she didn't call me right away. I figured she was either in denial or planning her next move. When she finally did call, it was a classic Claire performance. First came the crying and begging for forgiveness, saying it was just a mistake and that we could work through it. When I didn't budge, she flipped the script. Suddenly, I was the villain for filing for divorce. She accused me of humiliating her and setting her up to look bad in front of everyone. I kept my cool through it all and gave her the same response every time. Talk to my lawyer. That's when she tried fighting the prenup. Her lawyer argued that she deserved more, claiming she had sacrificed her career for me. They said that quitting her job at the clothing store was for my benefit, and I owed her compensation for all her hard work in our marriage. My lawyer shut that down fast. The evidence of her lavish spending combined with the affair gave her zero leverage. She wasn't supporting me. She was just draining my accounts. The judge wasn't impressed with her arguments. It was like watching her try to climb a greased pole. In the end, Claire got nothing except her personal belongings and a small settlement outlined in the prenup. It was barely enough to cover her basic expenses for a few months, laughable compared to the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. I kept everything else. The house, the car, all our savings, even the furniture and appliances. There was no drawn-out battle, no messy back and forth. The prenup made everything clear, leaving not a single loophole for her to exploit. The whole process was surprisingly quick, from filing to finalization taking just a few months total. I think it went so fast because Claire couldn't afford to drag it out. Without my money, she couldn't pay for an expensive lawyer or lengthy legal battles. When the divorce was finally finalized, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The past few months of lies, betrayal, and stress were finally gone. Claire was no longer my problem. Even after the divorce was finalized, Claire kept pushing her luck. She emailed me multiple times, accusing me of being heartless and saying I was punishing her for a mistake. She called me selfish and claimed that I had ruined her life. The truth is, she ruined her own life. She made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I didn't respond to any of her emails. There was no point anymore. Our relationship had ended the moment she chose Nathan over me. You'd think she would have learned her lesson by now, but life had more wake-up calls in store for her. Watching her fall from grace was both satisfying and surreal. I started hearing bits and pieces about what Claire was up to through mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist sharing the gossip. The first thing she tried was going back to the clothing store where we first met. She must have thought she could return and pick up where she left off before all this happened. Instead, she got a rude awakening. The store manager turned her down flat. Word about the party and her affair had spread throughout our social circles, and nobody wanted to hire her. The manager told a mutual friend that Claire's reputation was now toxic, and they didn't want the drama. She had burned bridges she didn't even know existed. As for Nathan, he didn't stick around long after the money dried up. The PI's reports were right about him. He was the kind of guy who coasted on his looks and charm, jumping between sugar mamas, and Claire was just another stepping stone in his journey. I heard through the grapevine that Claire tried reaching out to him after the divorce, but he ghosted her completely. No calls, no texts, nothing. She had funded his lifestyle for months, but the moment she couldn't keep up with the expenses, he moved on to his next target. I wonder if she ever realized how little she meant to him, or if she was too delusional to see it. Without Nathan and without my financial support, Claire's life fell apart completely. She ended up renting a tiny apartment on the outskirts of Miami, far from the upscale neighborhoods she used to frequent. There was nothing glamorous about it. It was all she could afford with the small settlement she received and whatever money she got from selling her designer items. Speaking of which, this was another blow to her ego. Claire loved her luxury items, handbags, shoes, jewelry, but she was forced to sell everything just to make ends meet. I heard she tried selling a handbag back to the boutique where she had originally purchased it, but they lowballed her with their offer. She had no choice but to take whatever they offered since she was desperate for cash. One of the most bizarre moments happened a few months after the divorce. I was just minding my own business at home when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Nathan standing there. I didn't recognize him at first. He was looking rough, and his usual cocky attitude was gone, replaced by what seemed like desperation. "Hey man," he started, scratching the back of his head nervously. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe, not inviting him in. "What do you want?" I asked coldly. Nathan launched into a rambling apology, claiming he didn't know Claire was married when they first started seeing each other. According to him, she had told him that we were separated and that I was emotionally abusive, which was laughable considering who Claire really was. He said Claire had promised him money, my money specifically, and now that she was broke, he was struggling too. This guy had the audacity to ask if I could help him out financially, since she dragged both of us into this mess. I laughed in his face. "You've got some nerve coming here," I told him. "You made your choices. Now deal with the consequences. Don't ever come back." I slammed the door in his face, still in disbelief that he thought I would give him money. He was just as entitled as Claire, and I had zero sympathy for either of them. Meanwhile, Claire wasn't done trying to crawl back into my life. She called and texted several times, begging for a second chance. She said she had made a mistake and that she missed what we had. She tried guilt-tripping me, saying she was lost without me and didn't know how to move forward with her life. The worst was when she showed up unannounced at my house. I opened the door to find her standing there looking disheveled and crying, saying she wanted to talk, that she just needed one chance to explain herself. I didn't let her in. I didn't even consider it for a second. "You made your bed," I told her coldly. "Now lie in it." Then I closed the door in her face. That was the last time I saw her in person. Over the next few months, Claire's downfall became the talk of our old social circle. She went from being the glamorous center of attention to a cautionary tale. People who used to worship her started distancing themselves, not wanting to be associated with her drama. Her charity friends replaced her at events, and the women in her social club stopped inviting her altogether. Every now and then, someone asks if I've heard from her. I just shake my head and say, nope. Claire's life now is just a shadow of what it once was. The woman who flaunted her designer lifestyle and acted above everyone else is now scraping by, trying to hold on to whatever dignity she has left. She's no longer the queen of the social circles. She's the story everyone whispers about at parties. As for me, I'm at peace with everything that happened. I learned a lot from this experience. The biggest takeaway is simple. Entitlement and greed will destroy you if you let them. Claire built her life on appearances, and when that facade crumbled, she had nothing left to stand on.